The Golden Age of Piracy, spanning roughly from the late 1600s to the early 1700s, was not an era of glamorous adventure, but a brutal, pragmatic struggle for survival. On the high seas, far from the comforts of port, a pirate crew's most valuable asset was not its treasure chest, but the health of its members. Injury and sickness were constant threats, more deadly than any naval cannonade. A broken limb could mean the end of a sailor's career. A festering wound could claim a life within days. In this world, medical care was not a luxury but a critical operational necessity, and it fell to one of the ship's most important officers, the surgeon. Often, a man pressed into service from a captured merchant vessel, or a barber with some crude anatomical knowledge. The surgeon worked with a terrifyingly limited toolkit. His medicine chest contained items like rum for anesthesia, saws for amputation, tar for cauterizing wounds, and a collection of dubious herbal poultices. The concept of germs was unknown. The prevailing medical theory involved balancing the body's four humors. Infection was routine, and pain was a given. The surgeon's primary goal was often simply to get a man back on his feet, or back to his station, as quickly as possible, using methods that were swift, brutal, and frequently ineffective. I've seen men with wounds that would make your stomach turn, and yet they had to be back to work in days, or we'd all be doomed, said Tom, a grizzled pirate who had spent years at sea. He sat on the deck, his eyes gazing out at the horizon, as he spoke of the harsh realities of life on a pirate ship. The smell of salt and tar filled the air, mingling with the sound of gulls crying overhead. Tom's voice was low and rough, worn from years of shouting over the wind and the waves. Against this backdrop of crude medicine and constant peril, the iconic image of the pirate with an eye patch begins to take on a new, more practical meaning. It was not a fashion statement born of swashbuckling bravado, but a piece of medical equipment, a response to a specific and horrifically common occupational hazard of life at sea. The patch was a tool of adaptation, born from a grim understanding of human physiology and the limitations of 17th century medicine. To understand why, one must first appreciate the particular challenges a pirate surgeon faced when dealing with injuries to what was arguably a sailor's most vital sensory organ, the eye. The open ocean offered a myriad of ways to lose one's sight. Rope lashed back across the face during a sudden maneuver, a wooden splinter from a cannonball strike flying into the socket, the blinding glare of the sun reflecting off the waves for hours on end, or the sudden searing pain of salt spray during a storm. In an age before safety goggles or even reliable sunglasses, eye injuries were commonplace. And for a pirate, whose life depended on his ability to spot distant sails, navigate by the stars, and fight in close quarters, blindness in one eye could be a death sentence. Yet, paradoxically, losing the use of one eye might have been preferable to losing the use of both. This is where the simple leather eye patch transitions from a pop culture prop to a piece of clever, if grim, biological strategy. The pirates knew that the eye was a fragile and vital organ, and they took steps to protect it, even if it meant sacrificing some of their vision. It was a calculated risk, one that might mean the difference between life and death in the harsh world of the high seas. As the sun began to set on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the waves, Tom stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked over to the ship's rail, his eyes scanning the sea for any sign of danger. The wind was picking up, and the ship was heeling slightly to one side. But Tom's gaze was steady, his focus fixed on the horizon. He was a man who had lived with the sea for years, and he knew its dangers and its beauty. And he knew that the eye patch, that simple piece of leather, was more than just a fashion statement. It was a symbol of the pirates' ingenuity and their will to survive in a world that was often cruel and unforgiving. Historical records provide some support for this idea, though direct evidence from pirate journals is scarce. Writing in 1934 for the Minnesota Academy of Sciences Journal, a researcher named Charles Sheard of the Mayo Foundation referred to the eye patch as a pirate's patch in the context of this very function. He pointed out that by wearing a patch, a person could maintain one eye's sensitivity to darkness. This was a documented concept in medical and optical texts of the era. The logic is sound within the historical context of seafaring. Naval warfare and piracy both involved close-quarters combat that spilled from the open deck into the cramped, windowless interiors of a ship. A man who could see immediately in the gloom held a significant tactical advantage over an opponent stumbling blindly. Consider the moment of boarding. A pirate crew rushes across a swaying plank, swords drawn, pistols primed. Above deck, the tropical sun blazes, reflecting off white sand and blue water. The deck is a blinding arena of light and movement. Then the fight moves below. In seconds, the same pirates drop through a hatch into the hold. The air turns cool and damp. The light vanishes. A man who has been using both eyes on deck will see nothing but black patches and floating shapes for perhaps 30 seconds. In that time, an opponent who has kept one eye shielded can already distinguish the outline of a barrel, the glint of a blade, the shape of a man. Those 30 seconds could decide a battle. The patch is not a sign of a missing eye. It is a deliberate tool for survival. Beyond combat, the practicality extended to the daily running of a vessel. Lookouts, staring at the bright horizon for hours, could have strained and sun-damaged eyes. A patch might offer relief. More importantly, sailors frequently had to go into the ship's hold to handle cargo, check bilge water, or access supplies. A prepared eye would make that work faster and safer, preventing accidents in a space filled with obstacles and low beams. Imagine a man descending a steep ladder into darkness, his arms full of rope or canvas. He needs to see where his feet land. He needs to spot a loose nail or a coil of line before it trips him. A single candle or lantern might flicker in the damp air, casting long shadows that shift and confuse. The eye that has been resting under a patch will adapt quickly, giving him a clear view of the dangers around him. It was a low-tech, highly effective piece of equipment. The patch itself required no maintenance, took up no space, and cost almost nothing to make from a scrap of leather or cloth. A man could cut a piece from an old belt or a discarded coat. He could tie it around his head with a strip of twine. In an environment where every item had to justify its place, the eye patch's utility for preserving vision would have been a compelling reason for its use. It was not a mark of honor or a trophy from a lost fight. It was a practical solution to a constant problem. The same problem faced every day by men who moved between sunlight and shadow, between the open sky and the dark belly of a ship. This explanation strips away the romanticized notion of the patch as a badge of injury and reveals it instead as a clever adaptation to a harsh and unpredictable environment. It speaks to the pragmatic ingenuity forced upon those who lived a life at sea, where the difference between success and disaster often came down to a matter of seconds and the ability to see what was right in front of you. The pirate eye patch, in this light, becomes something more interesting than a costume piece. It becomes evidence of a mind that understood its own limitations and found a way around them. It is a small, quiet piece of genius from a world that had no room for weakness. Life on a pirate vessel was a relentless test of endurance, a daily grind set against the vast indifference of the open ocean. Every task, from the simplest to the most perilous, demanded acute and reliable eyesight. A lookout, scanning the horizon for the faintest smudge of a sail, required perfect distance vision. A man climbing the rigging in a gale, his fingers numb and the ropes slick with spray, needed precise depth perception to avoid a fatal misstep. Even loading a cannon, a dangerous operation in the best conditions, depended on clear sight to measure powder and ram shot correctly. In this world, a man's value was tied directly to his physical capability, and his eyes were among his most vital tools. Vision impairment was not a minor inconvenience, it was a direct threat to a pirate's utility, and, by extension, his place within the ship's brutal economy. The challenges for a pirate with compromised vision were severe and multifaceted. Consider the environment itself. A ship's deck was a cluttered, ever-shifting landscape. Coils of rope, open hatches, stacked crates, and moving crewmates created a constant obstacle course. Poor vision increased the risk of injury from a simple trip or fall, which could easily become a death sentence if it happened during a storm or battle. Below decks, the situation was worse. The hold was a dark labyrinth of cargo and ballast, illuminated only by the occasional flicker of a lantern. A man with limited sight trying to fetch supplies or repair a leak in near-total darkness was practically helpless. In combat, the disadvantage was absolute. The chaos of a boarding action smoke, flashing steel, screaming men was disorienting enough for those with full sight. For someone with impaired vision, it was a death trap. They could not effectively parry an attack they barely saw coming, nor could they reliably strike an opponent. Such a sailor became a liability, endangering himself and the men fighting beside him. Given these stark realities, pirates could not afford to simply cast aside a crewman who lost an eye or suffered serious vision damage. Skilled seamen were a valuable, finite resource. The solution, therefore, was adaptation. The ship's social structure and division of labor allowed for a degree of flexibility. A man who could no longer serve as a topman aloft might be reassigned to duties that relied less on sharp distance vision and more on other senses or skills. He might become a helmsman, steering the ship by the feel of the wind and the compass, a task where touch and experience could compensate. He could be placed in charge of the ship's magazine, managing powder and shot in the controlled gloom below, where careful organization and a good memory were paramount. Some might take up carpentry in the orlop deck, repairing damage where close, detailed work was possible even with limited sight. The key was finding a niche where his remaining abilities still contributed to the collective survival of the crew. This pragmatic reshuffling of roles speaks to the harsh but oddly functional logic of pirate life. There was little room for sentiment, but there was a clear understanding of mutual dependence. Keeping a wounded but experienced man productive was smarter than marooning him or forcing him into a role where he would fail. The eye patch, in this context, emerges not as a flamboyant accessory but as a piece of utilitarian gear. It served an immediate medical purpose, protecting a wounded or sensitive eye from further injury from salt, sun, and flying debris, but its existence also symbolized a broader truth about piracy. It was a visible marker of a man who had paid a price, yet had been integrated back into the ship's workflow. He had adapted, and the crew had adapted around him, because on the unforgiving sea, every pair of working hands and every experienced mind mattered for the next dawn. A man with one eye could still grip a belaying pin, still brace a hatch, still shout a warning as the waves crashed over the bow. The quartermaster might assign him to the bilge pump, a monotonous task that demanded stamina more than sight. Or he might stand watch with a speaking trumpet, relaying orders from the helm to the deck below. In the galley, a cook with limited vision could slice salt pork by feel, his knife finding the grain of the meat through years of habit. These men were not discarded because the crew understood that survival depended on every available hand pulling together. The eye patch was a badge of that resilience, a silent statement that the man wearing it had not been broken by his injury. He had simply found a new way to serve, and the ship was stronger for it. The popular image of the pirate with a patch over a missing eye is not entirely false. Many pirates did lose eyes in battle, in accidents, or from diseases like syphilis and scurvy. Eye injuries were common on sailing ships because of flying splinters, snapped rigging, and close-quarters combat with cutlasses and knives. An eye patch was a simple and effective way to cover a damaged or missing eye, protecting it from infection and debris. So the myth of the one-eyed pirate has a basis in reality, but it is only part of the story. What about the wooden leg and the hook hand? These also have real historical roots. Pirates who lost limbs in battle or accidents often used crude prosthetics made by the ship's carpenter. A wooden leg was a practical solution, though it was uncomfortable and difficult to use on a moving ship. The hook hand was less common but did appear in some cases. The famous pirate Edward Teach, known as Blackbeard, was said to have worn a sling for his arm after an injury, but the hook and peg leg became exaggerated in fiction. The romanticized pirate of popular culture comes largely from Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, published in 1883, and from later Hollywood films. Long John Silver, with his crutch and parrot, and the one-eyed pirates with patches, became the standard image. These fictional portrayals were so powerful that they shaped public perception for generations. The real pirates of the 17th and 18th centuries were often ragged, sick, and desperate men, not the swashbuckling adventurers of the movies. They wore whatever clothing they could steal or trade, and an eye patch was just one of many practical items that might serve a purpose. Historian Dr. Rebecca Simon sat in her office, surrounded by dusty tomes and faded manuscripts, and pondered the mythology of the pirate eye patch. It's fascinating to see how a simple piece of cloth has become an enduring symbol of piracy, she said, her eyes scanning the pages of a worn book. But the truth is far more complex and nuanced. Pirates wore eye patches for a variety of reasons, from medical necessity to tactical advantage. She leaned back in her chair, a look of satisfaction on her face. The evidence suggests that some pirates did wear eye patches to preserve night vision, though no surviving document confirms this directly. The theory is plausible and fits with what we know about naval tactics and human physiology. As she delved deeper into her research, Dr. Simon began to notice a pattern. Many of the pirates who wore eye patches had been involved in intense naval battles, where the ability to see in the dark would have been a significant advantage. She imagined the chaos of a nighttime battle, the sound of cannons blazing, the smell of gunpowder and sweat. In such a scenario, an eye patch would have been a vital tool, allowing a pirate to navigate the darkness with ease. At the same time, many pirates wore patches because they had actually lost an eye. "Doctor," Simon continued, "the two explanations are not mutually exclusive. The real reason pirates wore eye patches is a blend of medical necessity, tactical advantage, and later fictional embellishment. The truth is often less dramatic than the legend, but it is no less fascinating. These men and women lived in a world of constant danger, where a simple piece of cloth could mean the difference between seeing an enemy in the dark and stumbling blindly into a blade. The eye patch was not a fashion statement or a mark of villainy. It was a tool, born of necessity and refined by experience. And that, in the end, is the most honest answer history can give." As doctor, Simon closed her book and leaned back in her chair. She felt a sense of satisfaction and clarity. The myth of the pirate eye patch had been debunked, and the truth, though less sensational, was no less compelling. The eye patch, a simple piece of cloth, had played a significant role in the lives of pirates, and its story was one of practicality, ingenuity, and survival.